On June 24, 1982, British Airways Flight 009 was en route from Mumbai to Australia, flying over Jakarta, Indonesia. Everything was in order. The sky was clear. While it was cruising at 37,000 feet from the ground, suddenly strange lights began flashing outside the aircraft, creating a surreal, otherworldly experience that felt more like flying through space than the sky. Have you any idea what happened next? What will you do if you are on that flight? Stay tuned and experience a story which we never guess beforehand. British Airways Flight 009 was a Boeing 747-200, a model known for its large size and long-range capabilities. This plane originated from Heathrow Airport in London, United Kingdom, and made its first stopover at Sahar Airport in Bombay, India. The flight continued with a second stopover at Sultan Abdul Aziz Shah Airport in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, followed by a third stopover at Perth Airport in Perth, Western Australia, Australia. The last stopover was at Melbourne Airport in Melbourne, Victoria, Australia, before reaching its final destination at Auckland Airport in Auckland, New Zealand. On the 24th of June 1982, the route was flown by the city of Edinburgh. At the time of the incident, the aircraft was equipped with 4 engines, which were crucial for maintaining its altitude and speed. The plane was flying from Mumbai to Australia with a scheduled route that included several stops. The aircraft flew into a cloud of volcanic ash thrown up by the eruption of Mount Galunggung, around 110 miles southeast of Jakarta, Indonesia, resulting in the failure of all 4 engines. Partly because the event occurred at night, obscuring the cloud, the reason for the failure was not immediately apparent to the crew or air traffic control. The aircraft was diverted to Jakarta in the hope that enough engines could be restarted to allow it to land there. The aircraft glided out of the ash cloud, and all engines were restarted, although engine number 2 started vibrating and the crew had to shut it down soon after, allowing the aircraft to land safely at Halim Perdana Kusuma Airport in Jakarta. The crew members of the accident segment had boarded the aircraft in Kuala Lumpur, while many of the passengers had been aboard since the flight began in London. The pilots for this flight were 41-year-old Captain Mayday and 30-year-old First Officer Rose, who was relatively young but well-trained. The aircraft carried 248 passengers who were caught off guard by the sudden and alarming situation. Captain Mayday and his crew faced a crisis they had never been trained for, with the responsibility of ensuring the safety of everyone on board. At 8:40 p.m., the plane was above the Indian Ocean, south of Java. The aircraft was navigating through an area with numerous small islands, and the crew was unaware of the volcanic ash cloud that was about to create severe problems. The crew first noticed an unusual effect on the windscreen similar to St. Elmo's fire, while Captain was heading to the lavatory. Despite the weather radar showing clear skies, the crew switched on engine anti-ice and the passenger seatbelt signs as a precaution. As the flight progressed, smoke began to accumulate in the passenger cabin of the aircraft. It was first assumed to be cigarette smoke. However, it soon began to grow thicker and had an odor of sulfur. Passengers who had a view of the aircraft's engines through the window noted that they were unusually bright blue, with light shining forward through the fan blades and producing a stroboscopic effect. Around 13:42 UTC, 2042 Jakarta time, the number 4 Rolls-Royce RB211 engine began surging and soon flamed out. The flight crew immediately performed the engine shutdown drill, quickly cutting off fuel supply and arming the fire extinguishers. Less than a minute later, Engine 2 surged and flamed out. Within seconds, and almost simultaneously, Engines 1 and 3 flamed out and all 4 engines failed. Without engine thrust, the aircraft has a glide ratio of roughly 15.1. The flight crew quickly determined that the aircraft was capable of gliding for 23 minutes and covering 91 nautical miles from its flight level of 37,000 feet. After a few minutes, Greaves broadcast a Mayday to the local air traffic control authority, stating that all 4 engines had failed. However, Jakarta Area Control misunderstood the message, interpreting the call as meaning that only engine number 4 had shut down. After a nearby Garuda Indonesia flight relayed the message to them, air traffic control correctly understood the urgent message. Despite the crew squawking the emergency transponder setting of 7700, air traffic control could not locate the 747 on their radar screens. As pressure within the cabin fell, oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling, an automatic emergency measure to make up for the lack of air. The captain swiftly decided to descend at 1,800 meters per minute to an altitude where there was enough pressure in the outside atmosphere to breathe almost normally. Many passengers, fearing for their lives, wrote notes to relatives. At 13,500 feet, the crew was approaching the altitude at which they would have to turn over the ocean and attempt a risky ditching. Although the crew had guidelines for the water landing procedure, no one had ever tried it in a Boeing 747. As they performed the engine restart procedure, engine number 4 finally started. And at 13:56 UTC, the captain used its power to reduce the rate of descent. Shortly thereafter, Engine 3 restarted, allowing him to climb slowly. Shortly after that, Engines 1 and 2 successfully restarted as well. The crew subsequently requested and expedited an increase in altitude to clear the high mountains of Indonesia. As Flight 009 approached Jakarta's Halim Perdanakusuma International Airport, the crew found seeing anything through the windscreen difficult and made the approach almost entirely on instruments, despite reports of good visibility. The crew decided to fly the instrument landing system, but the vertical guidance system was inoperative, so they were forced to fly with only the lateral guidance as the first officer monitored the airport's distance measuring equipment. He then called out how high they should be at each DME step along the final approach to the runway, creating a virtual glide slope for them to follow. Although the runway lights could be made out through a small strip of the windscreen, the landing lights on the aircraft seemed to be inoperable. After landing, the flight crew found taxiing impossible due to glare from apron floodlights, which made the already sand-blasted windscreen opaque. Upon disembarking, the flight engineer knelt at the bottom of the steps and kissed the ground. The aftermath of the incident revealed that the aircraft had flown through a volcanic ash cloud from Mount Galunggung. The volcanic particles, extremely fine and light, had traveled over 100 kilometers and created intense light and smoke. These particles clogged the engines and sensors, causing their failure. As the plane descended, the volcanic ash dissipated and the particles solidified, allowing the engines to restart. The windscreen suffered significant damage from the ash, but the plane was safely returned to service after extensive repairs and engine replacements. This event marked a significant moment in aviation history, demonstrating the dangers of volcanic ash clouds. The bravery of the pilots, who received numerous awards for their heroism, and the subsequent lessons learned from this incident led to increased awareness and precautionary measures to prevent similar occurrences. The route was declared a no-flying zone until volcanic activity ceased, and the aviation industry became more vigilant about the risks posed by volcanic ash. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into one of aviation's most intense incidents. Stay tuned to get an interesting video like this. Stay safe and keep exploring with Air Crash Breakdown.